Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, again, this is Scott. Just a few housekeeping notes. Again, thanks for all you're doing during this difficult time or challenging time, and we appreciate you taking time out to come in here and let us provide you updates on the legislative session from 2020. Now, some of you may be asking, well, with some of the uncertainty that's related to the state fiscal year 21 budget or the uncertainty related to it, why go through all of this? We feel it's still a value add to make sure that you all see and understand what we put together coming out of the session. And we'll focus on bills with just fiscal notes on them. Typically, if we did all of the bills that came out of the session, or what we've done with superintendents up to this point, it would take about 2 hours. But we want to get to a lot of other topics with you while we have this time, this 3 hours with you between 9 and 12. We'll take breaks periodically so that you get a little bit of time away from your screen. You all should be able to see the agenda. We identified and Leon approved 5 items for us to cover. Again, we'll start off with the overview of the 2020 session. We'll do some legislative summary. We'll also cover, last week you're probably all tracking that on Thursday we had, the legislature had a special session. So we'll look at any of the statutory changes. What we're viewing is the state fiscal year 21 budget implications, not only of the session itself, but of course the coronavirus pandemic situation holistically. Then we'll go ahead and let you know about where we're headed going into the next year, especially with your July allocations. I'll turn that time over to our school finance director, Patrick Lee, and our MSP coordinator, Jake. Then they'll come back to me and we'll cover you more in depth the CARES Act funding. We've had a lot of activity on that, but again, I'll catch everybody up on that, or show you or tell you where we're at with that. And then we'll also discuss some of the policy questions that we've been getting, related to the soft closures. Everybody's aware the governor announced that we wouldn't be having kids, our students return back to the classrooms. They're still being provided the virtual or digital learning experience. But I'll get into some more details on item number 5. You should be able to see on my screen, it's on the right-hand side, but it lists the participants, including your name. So if you use your mouse and hover over your name, there's a hand there. Will everybody click on their hand so we can, and Cammie, you got to attest to this. Cammie, can you see everybody's hands raised over there when they click on it? Everybody should be able to see your hand if you hover over your name in the participant group.
I've got several coming
you see
up.
those, Cammie?
Yep.
Cammie, I'm not hearing you too well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you better. Can you see hands raised?
I can see hands. Yep.
Okay. Hey, Cammie, you're gonna have to turn your volume up. You're really low on your volume.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead and unclick your hands. Also, towards the bottom right, there's a chat message here. Okay, you don't have to test that now, but it should be able to say send to everyone. Or you can highlight or click on a particular name, and then you can privately chat with somebody. Like if you want to reach out to me, you can click on my name and enter a chat message privately to me. If you feel like you want to ask the whole, a question without raising your hand, we'll monitor the chat room as best we can. Sometimes though, the chats, outpace our ability to track all the different questions, but that's another way that you can reach out to us. And then as Jerry Record mentioned, Jerry's our USBE technical support person. If you're not speaking, please make sure both your camera and your microphone are muted, especially the microphone. If you do speak to the group, we encourage you to use your camera, to go ahead and turn your camera on and your microphone. Cammie, as our host, Cammie Wilcox is my assistant. She has the ability to mute others. So, if you have an open mic or something, we might, we might go ahead and mute you if we get too much background noise, or just let you know or let the group know that we're hearing a lot of background noise. The other thing too, one of the key processes that we wanted to take and we planned on taking before all this happened when we were going to physically meet with you in Provo is I want to introduce Patrick Lee. He's our new school finance director. So I just want to turn a little bit of time over to Patrick, if that's okay, Leon, so he can introduce himself to the group. We'll put him on camera. He can give you a little bit of background so you can put a name with the face because he's an integral part of our team and he's here to support you. So Patrick, will you go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know a lot about you, please? Go ahead.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you. Hopefully you guys can all see and hear me now, but great to be with you. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones brought me on board recently, started in January. So I'm fresh off the boat, as you could say. Originally from Oklahoma, but I've lived here in Utah for about 20 years now, finishing up school, and I've been with the state for about 16 years. And just a little background, got my MPA and did finance. And then worked for the Utah Department of Health for about 4 years as a data analyst and epidemiologist. And then I finally shifted into finance when I started with the legislative fiscal analyst. And that's where I was on the Public Education Appropriations Committee for about 3 years with Ben Lishman, and really enjoyed my time there. I also worked on the regulatory agencies, which included things like commerce, insurance, et cetera. Shifted over to the governor's office for about a year. And then I was poached by one of the state agencies, the Utah Insurance Department, and was their finance director for about 7.5 years. And now here I am back in education. I'm really excited to be working with all of you.
Thanks, Patrick. So Leon, without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and spin up agenda item number 1, which is the overview of the 2020 session. Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings is here. She's our Deputy Superintendent of Policy. She and our Director, Jeff Van Holten, will be presenting, and I'll jump in or chime in, as necessary. Remember, you can raise your hand. We'll try to monitor hand raises, but if we don't see you, go ahead and try to enter enter a chat message or enter a question into the chat message block. And we'll try to answer your questions as we go. So Angie, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. I hope you all can hear me. Good morning, everyone. Angie Stallings here, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. And as Scott mentioned, we've also got Jeff Van Holten presenting with me. And right now you can see he's projecting the summary. And just I'm happy to be with you all this morning. Thanks for having us. Before we start, I wanted to just kind of test the chat box and let you all see how the chat box works. So Jeff, could you go to the next slide quickly? And wanted you all to just take a moment to describe in the chat box what phrase of 3 words or less describes your experience teleworking. So if you guys could go ahead in there in the chat box and just share with everyone what your experience has been like teleworking. And there's 76 people, so is that what this is called? Should be the wave of the future. Love it. Yes. Pajamas. Spotty. I see that. Not ideal. Better than expected. I love to see that. Pretty sweet. Miserable. Finally 3 meals a day. I agree with the professional mullet. I've thought of that myself, I'll have to say. My husband thinks it's hilarious when I come up and I have a nice top on with a necklace and my makeup done, but then, you have sweats and house shoes on the bottom. So looks like Brent comes into the district office still. Anyway, lots. I like the professional mullet. We'll call it the professional mullet, which is Professional on top, party on the bottom, or professional on top and relaxed on the bottom. I guess that's the way to say it. So, and I agree with Cami. It gets better every day in the sense that I think we get used to it more and more and learn more about how to function in this, the new now. Productive but challenging. I like that. So thank you guys. All of these are really good. I agree with you. I miss my colleagues, seeing them in person. And I'm sure that's what most of us miss is it is a little surreal. I'm sure you've all experienced this where I know there's 77 of you or 76 of you out there, yet I'm pretty much speaking to my laptop. And so I look forward opportunities during this presentation for you to share with each other and share with me some of your feedback and comments in the comment box, please do. And also, if you have a verbal comment or question you'd like to make, please feel free to raise your hand and maybe turn your video on so that Cami sees that you would like to speak. We welcome verbal questions, but you could also type in your questions as we go into the chat box. And Jeff, Scott, and I, Cami, I'm sure too, we'll monitor those questions in the chat box and try to answer those as we go along. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for participating and for providing your comments in there. It was good to see how everyone's feeling, and good to see you all, at least in name, if not face. So I hope I'll be able to see some of your faces as we go along today. So first we'll start off with just giving a general summary of what happened this session. It's been, you know, kind of an interesting post-session period because we had such a fantastic session and it's been really, we haven't celebrated at all. And so we'll try and celebrate the wins as much as we can, even though we know that some of these things may unfortunately be undone due to COVID-19. But we definitely need to celebrate the wins that happened this session. So first, as Jeff has posted up there, you can see that we had quite a high bill passage rate this session. 198 bills introduced and 112 bills that were passed. 56% is very high. Usually it's more like 40 to 45% of education bills passed during the session. I think that a lot of this is due to the fact that we had many bills that our office actually asked for. Many were technical changes. We had a lot of kind of retooling of existing programs like the U-Star program into the MOS program. We also had some changes with our enhancement for accelerated students and concurrent enrollment programs. So I think that the good news was we had a lot of bills, but hopefully it won't seem like a huge impact to you all because they weren't bills that were being run or passed by different special interest groups reaching out to legislators, but instead came from the public ed community. And so let's go to the next slide, Jeff. And you can see here what the work will look like for the board and staff and for all of you as well. Now, the great news that we need to celebrate, which again is a little hard to celebrate, but I think there are things we can find, is that it was a record-breaking year as far as funding. I believe $403 million of new funding is the largest I think I've ever seen in my 15 years of either working for the legislature or watching the legislature. And we'll see in a minute that 250 million of that came out of just the WPU increase and enrollment growth. So you can look forward to about 31 new rules coming, well, new or amended rules coming out of our office. One new program, 5 new grant programs, so 2 new programs total. 11 reports, and those are reports for us to provide to the legislature. But of course, whenever we provide reports to the legislature, that usually means reporting for you all too. And then 6 RFPs that we'll be going through. So again, I just wanted to mention, and it says D has their hand raised. So in just a sec, D, I'll go to you. But I just wanted to mention, I think that the fact that the public education community and the legislature were able to come together to to appropriate $403 million is a huge accomplishment and shows the relationship that we all have now with the legislature and how much the legislature, I think, values public education and wants to see it succeed. So Dee, you've got your hand raised. Would you like to say something? Or maybe that was an accident. I'm not hearing anything. So I will take it that Dee, so it looks like Michelle, would you like to say something?
No, I shouldn't have my hand up.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. How about R. Peterson? Okay. Well, maybe those are all hands that just didn't come down after we asked for the tests. So feel free to let us know in the chat box if you would like to be recognized. So as I mentioned before, 6% increase on the WPU, which results in, with the line item increases 9.5% increase to the minimum school program and 5.91 billion total. Next slide, Jeff, I think is going to just show the increase to through the WPU and enrollment growth, which was $252 million ongoing, and an increase of 7,902 students. And then one more slide, I think, to get through kind of the overview of the basic program. There was now we'll talk about in a minute the change to SB 104, which now allows those of you who qualify for the board and local or the voted and board local guarantee programs to now get up to 20 increments guaranteed versus 16. So the next 3 slides kind of go over the top fiscal impacts or line items or programs that were funded this session. Now, for the majority of these programs, we'll wait to talk about each of them later on when we go through the policy related to it. So we'll be talking about, for example, OEK, HB 99 later in the presentation. But I did want to highlight 5 of the line items, the fiscal line items here that aren't associated with bills. So the first one you can see there is the $30 million one time for student safety. We're still waiting to see what will happen with that line item, but that was something we were really excited about to get $30 million. Next slide, Jeff. There's 2, I believe, on this next slide, or 3. The computer science grants program that passed last year and had about a $3 million increase, or just a $3 million one-time fiscal funding. This year it was funded at $7 million ongoing. And then also we received $1.8 million for the Adobe software licenses and $900,000 one time to continue providing Qualtrics, the Qualtrics license from the state board level for this next year. And then the rest of these will be, as I mentioned, we'll be discussing when we talk about the bills in a moment. And then on this slide, we received $5 million of an increase to student transportation, which we're excited about. And I believe the rest on this slide are related to bills. So we'll go through the rest of those funding line items later. So we'll take one more little break, a little break here, brain break for you all. If you could, again, use your chat box to let us know which bill are you most interested in discussing today. I don't see any yet. TSSA, okay. SB 4, kindergarten expansion. So TSSA, interestingly enough, wasn't amended this year. So maybe we'll take an opportunity to talk about TSSA. The one thing, I guess, that, and maybe Scott could talk to this more later, We do have the HB, I think it was, can't remember the number right now, but it was Representative Thurston's bill that capped the amount of property tax that would be raised when the WPU increases come. And I guess in some ways that relates to the TSSA. So this year, I believe about 30, yes, thank you, HB 77, Representative Thurston. So as many of you know, for every 1% on the WPU that is raised, approximately $5 million of property tax are raised and deposited into the TSSA restricted account. So I believe that's the only funding, new funding for TSSA that did go in to the TSSA restricted account. It is a significant amount of money, however, you know, $30,000. So we'll talk about the school counselor bill later on. We'll talk about school fees. School fees, thank you for bringing that one up because it does not necessarily have a fiscal impact, but I'll make sure and cover those school fee bills later on. So I see TSSA, the financial information systems bill, school counselors, school fees, and HB 77. Could any of you who are truth and taxation requirements, and I'm guessing when you say that, you're wondering about moving forward, maybe from the special session. Could you just clarify that, Stephanie? I'm guessing that you're wondering how that's going to be impacted this year. Okay, thank you. So we'll talk about that when we, not around the 2020 summary, but at some point we'll move into the board's waivers, the board's request for statutory changes, and some of the bills that have passed this far. They passed last week in the special session, so we'll do that. Can I get somebody who listed TSSA to please clarify what you would like to discuss about TSSA? Is it, maybe we just need to at some point, okay, so Dale says there was 20.6 million that went to TSSA. Maybe you can just clarify in the chat box, are you wanting to talk about moving forward, what that looks like? Because I'm not really sure of a bill that impacted or changed TSSA. So we won't probably talk about it right now, but if you'll just let me or Scott know what it is about TSSA that you're interested in discussing, that'll be helpful. So thank you guys, that was very helpful. So let's move forward. And of course, money changes to be expected in future special sessions. We will discuss that at some point as well. So I will finally let you turn the time over. I'll turn the time to Jeff so you guys can see him and hear from him. And maybe you might, Jeff, want to introduce yourself a little bit to this group because I don't know that you've presented to the Uasbo before.
No, this is my first time, and I assume everyone can hear me okay. I'm wearing the headphones today. I want to make sure the microphone is not too quiet. My name is
How are you, Jeff?
Great. Thank you, Angie. I am Jeff Van Holden. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the board. I am also a member of the policy team and help during the legislative session, as well as help with the drafting of administrative rules with Angie. I have never presented to you all before, so I'm a little nervous today because this is the that can ask all the questions that I don't understand because I am not a finance person. Although I'm learning quickly, there is no way you can be in education and not at some point dive headfirst into the money portion of it. So I have been learning, and I will do my best to present as best as I can. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to quickly, in lieu of time, I'll be kind of brief on some of the details. Feel free to jump into the chat and say, hey, Jeff, stop. I want to hear more about that. Otherwise, I'll kind of cruise through some of this so that we can get through the bulk of this by the end of our hour. So House Bill 99 was from Representative Snow. This is the optional enhanced kindergarten program. Some of you may have been receiving funding for the kindergarten supplemental enrichment program. So we had two extended kindergarten programs. The Kindergarten Supplemental Enrichment Program, was funded with TANF money. That money is gone now. And so what we did is we combined the two programs into one, received $10 million additional dollars on top of the 7.5 we have for the optional enhanced kindergarten program. And we took the performance measure outcomes you have to have for the kindergarten supplemental enrichment program and now make those a requirement for the optional enhanced kindergarten program. So more money, which is great, but for a lot of you that receive what we call OEK money, you will be getting some new performance measures that you need to demonstrate to remain eligible for those funds moving forward. The next slide is House Bill 114. This one has 114. This one has 3 elements to the bill. And really quick, Chad says, with this enhanced kindergarten bill, please explain the funding formula and the distribution. So that is done on an application basis. You will all apply, and I believe it is done competitively, but my mind is blanking. Angie or Scott, I cannot recall if this is a formula, or I'm pretty sure it is a competitive application, but I might be wrong on that one.
I believe there is a formula of what you can, what you qualify for, but it is on application basis. As far as I know, every school district participates and receives funding from the enhanced kindergarten program. I believe we've got about maybe 40 charter schools who also participate. So it'd be the same way if you're currently receiving OEK funding. You can expect, of course, to receive that. There's about, as Jeff mentioned, there was about $2.5 million of TANF funding that went away. And so that amount's replaced by the 10. So we essentially have a little over $7 million of new funding. And I believe it's based on, and I want to say it's based on your kindergarten numbers, but Scott, I don't know if you can remember exactly how that is.
Yeah. So it is. It's my understanding is it is based on, you know, the student counts in kindergarten. So, but what we can do is I can get, you know, clarity on that and then follow up behind it. So with them.
And I have a text into our staff to get that answered. So I'll get that answer for you.
All right, Jeff, if you'll do that, then, you know, I'm sure later on in the meeting they can do it. So.
Perfect. So we'll pause on that question. We'll move on to House Bill 114 that does 3 separate things. The first, it creates a new requirement that teachers to get a license have to pass a literacy preparation assessment before they can get their license. So we're working with USHE and the Board of Regents to get that requirement rolling in our teacher prep programs. The other 2 components of this bill, one is it creates a professional learning development grant. You can get money for professional learning, but it's for pre-K to grade 3 teachers in the early learning space. So this is in conjunction with your early learning plan, which you might be familiar with right now as the early literacy plan. But that is just the final thing that this bill does. It expands early literacy to now include early mathematics. So they've changed the name of it to early learning. And you'll have to submit an early learning plan, and there will also be a statewide benchmark assessment for early mathematics, just like you have DIBELS or Acadians for early literacy. The funding formula for the development grant will be on a proportionate basis. So how many pre-K to grade 3 teachers do you have in your LEA in relation to how many there are statewide? We received $4.8 million in this bill for the professional learning grant. There's about 87 to 8,800 pre-K to grade 3 teachers. So the rough math is about $450 per teacher based on last year's pre-K to grade 3 teacher count. So that'll be a qualified formula. As long as you have your early learning plan submitted, you will get your $450 per teacher along with that. Next slide, I'll pass to Angie.
Great, thank you. So the next 2 bills go hand in hand together, SJR 9 and HB 357. Just one moment, I just got a text. I want to make sure. Yes. And yes, we will have the slides available for you all, and we're planning to post them on our website as well. So they'll be available. And later in the presentation, Jeff and I will show you where you can find the bill book, where you can find a quick guide we have, and where we will be posting these slides on our website that you can access at any time. So, and I apologize, we probably could have sent them to you before today's meeting and should have done that. So we'll make sure and get those to Scott and he can send them to you. So first, SJR 9, the proposal to amend the Utah Constitution, use of tax revenue. As many of you know, our current constitution allows revenue from income tax to only be used for public K-12 public education as well as higher education. And if SJR 9 passes, that bill would change, if it's voted on, it will be voted on by the voters this November, but it does have to pass 50% or more of the voters voting in favor of it. The amendment would allow the use of income tax revenue to be used to support services for children and individuals with disabilities. And then if that constitutional amendment passes, then HB 357 would take effect next year in 2021. And what that bill does is it does quite a number of things that I'm sure you all will be interested in. First, it creates a restricted account, a stabilization restricted account within the uniforms fund, which is within the education fund. Why that's important is the Uniform School Fund is still a constitutionally protected fund within the education fund that only K-12 has access to. And so every year, what the bill would do is it would automatically have the tax commission deposit straight from them into this restricted account within the Uniform School Fund an amount equal to enrollment growth and inflation, the average over the prior 5 years, and that's approximately 2%. And so that would be similar to about a 2% increase on the WPU. That amount would be appropriated to public education in the base budget every year, which is fantastic, because as you know, until this year, we've always had to wait until the last week of the session even to see if enrollment growth is going to be funded. And so if HB 357 passes, enrollment growth and approximately 2% of the WPU would be appropriated and deposited into the base budget, which passes the first week of the session. The other elements of this bill that I'm sure you all would be interested in is in those years when we have above trend revenue, it would reserve that above trend revenue into the stabilization fund to fund the enrollment growth and that inflationary increase in the down years. Also, in the down years, it would allow you all to use your capital levy funds for maintenance operations or salaries purposes. And so that would be an automatic change that would happen whenever our office would let you know when there's been a downturn in the session. And then the last thing, I'm trying to remember what else happened in that bill. I think that's about it. Do you any of you have questions? I know this was a big bill this year, and we will be waiting to see if the constitutional amendment passes this fall. So anyone have any questions on this one? Otherwise, we'll move forward.
Angie, I do have a question. This is Kyle Hosser from San Juan. So in what you just stated, sorry, hello. In what you just stated, I just wanted to clarify. So in those years of downturn or in the up years where there's additional revenue that's deposited, is that going to be held at the state tax commission level, or would that be put into PTIF so it would act as a interest-bearing account, or how does that work? Where does the surplus go? And then my second question is, you're saying in those downturn years, we would be able to use those capital dollars for general maintenance. How would we identify that, or what would be the process to communicate that through the public so that they understand our capital levy was set at such a percent, we generated the revenue, but we have an allowance of a certain percent or all of it to be able to be used for general funds? How would we go about explaining that or clarifying that with the public?
Great. So I kind of actually heard three questions there. The first one is what happens to the above trend funding? My recollection from the bill is that above trend funding goes into the stabilization account within the Uniform School Fund within within the education fund. So it doesn't stay at the tax commission. It would go into an account or a fund that the legislature has set up. Second question is, how would you know when you're able to use, when we've hit that trigger of a downturn to allow you to use your capital funds? Our office would notify you of that. We're required to notify LEAs when that happens. But the third question you asked was a good one. How do you let members of the public know about that happening and the fact that you'll be using those capital revenue for maintenance and operation purposes? And I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't remember seeing a requirement for you to notify the public like you've had to do maybe in other years. And Scott, this might be something you could answer. If not, we can look it up, but I don't believe there's a requirement for you to proactively notify the members of the public. You can just do it. But if you wanted to do that in order to maintain kind of that transparency and knowledge out in the public, I think that could be a good idea.
Scott, there is no requirement for notifying the public, but I'll double check as well, and then we'll get back to the whole group. Kyle, that's a great question. But as it stands right now, we're tracking that you don't have a condition that you have to let the public know.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, and that was my recollection as well. There's no requirement for you to notify the public. So, okay, thank you. Those were great questions. So it looks like no other questions in the chat box. So Jeff, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you to go to the next slide.
Yes, they do have an answer for Chad about the money for optional enhanced kindergarten. It is competitive for charter schools, so they take a chunk of the money and set it aside, and it's competitive for them. For district schools, it is a base plus formula. So every district, all 41 districts, gets a base amount, and then the additional amount you get is dependent upon how many of your student population is on free and reduced lunch. And that is a multiplier they use to give you the plus amount. That is how we fund OEK down to your levels. Hopefully that answered your question, Chad. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll make sure that you and Erica Thomas, I can send her email to you and she can kind of give you more details. Very quickly on Senate Bill 99, this is a school leadership development amendment. This creates a leadership development grant program that you can apply for. The target is 3 different populations: aspiring leaders, where you'll create residencies and internships for up and coming leadership that want to become principals but are not currently principals. The second group are new, defined in their principal job. And this program would give money for mentorships for those principals. And the third group is the existing principals outside of the first 3 years. And there is, you can use the funding for professional development for that group. We received $5 million in this bill, a little bit shy of the $15 million we originally asked for. So the money will be on a competitive basis, although everyone will receive a guaranteed base amount for a planning grant. So every district and charter should get, there is enough money to give everyone $15,000 for a planning grant. There's some conditions that apply with that money. You'll have to attend several workshops over the course of a few months to help you develop your full plan and how to implement your plan. And then there is an implementation grant for about the top 10 to 15 LEAs to really roll out their leadership programs. So that is Senate Bill 99 and some of the elements with the funding on that one. I'll pass it back to Angie.
Great. Although these two bills don't really have a fiscal impact, they are of kind of importance and people seem to be very interested in them. So I'll just review them very quickly. HB 420 just allows the board to establish the exit criteria for the turnaround program now in board rule and eliminates a lot of those kind of micromanagey elements that were in statute. And then SB 119 That bill allows the board to not issue letter grades for the 18-19 school year as well as the 19-20 school year, the school year we're in right now. So the board will likely, just as a reminder, it doesn't mean that the letter grades will not be issued, but it does provide the board the authority not to issue them. As you know, likely will not issue the letter grades, but it's kind of a nuance. It does take an additional motion from the board to kind of confirm that. But those are the two school accountability bills that passed this year. All right, Jeff, back to you.
Okay, quickly, I'm not going to cover every bill on this slide in particular, just because we're running a little bit low on time. But House Bill 58 does come with some funding, and there are multiple components to this bill. First, it allows schools to confiscate and destroy e-cigarette paraphernalia without having to return it to parents. The next is it does require that every school designate a positive behavior specialist out of existing staff. And well, I guess it could be new staff as well, but you have to designate somebody as a positive behavior specialist, and they would be in charge of implementing the positive behavior plan that every school principal is required to create for their school. This bill comes with about $4.3 million to give every positive behavior specialist a $3,000 a year stipend for doing that job, and an additional $1,000 for implementation of the positive behavior plan. So purchasing materials, enrolling in a nonprofit organization to run a program. The positive behavior specialist will be in charge of running some kind of peer support group programs or networks within the school. House Bill 323, there was a few of you that mentioned this one was of note. It does two different things. It amends the existing mental health professionals grant that we have. And then it also creates a new program that allows LEAs to have mental health screeners if they choose. It's an opt-in. And if you do it, you would have to apply to the board to get your screener approved. And there is a little bit of money as well set aside for procuring the screener that you might get. And there is a portion of the bill that allows LEAs to cover costs of treatment for students, for qualified parents, and seek reimbursement from the state board. This bill only came with $500,000 total, so there's not a lot of money here for everyone to go out and buy the most expensive mental health screener or to give every parent financial aid for treatment. But that is an option, and we'll be writing some rules around how that will be distributed. The other piece of this bill amends the mental health professional grant that you're all probably familiar with, the $16 million the board got last year. You all applied with a plan, a 3-year plan on how you will utilize the money to hire mental health professionals in your LEA. This bill makes an amendment that now allows you to use the TSSA money as part of the matching requirement for that grant. Previously, you could not use TSSA money to count as your match. So now you can use TSSA to hire mental health professionals and count that toward the match for this grant. And once your 3-year plan is up and you resubmit a new 3-year plan, the matching requirement will be removed. So that is also nice. I'll jump over to the next slide. These other two are fairly small in terms of financial.
Jeff,
Yes.
could I just, sorry, not interrupt, but just add something, and I apologize if you already made this clarification, but if those of you would like to use your TSSA funding as the match for purposes of the school, the mental health program, you would want to make sure that your TSSA plan does include that that person as part of your plan and include it in your plan. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear too, because I've had that question come up a couple of other times.
Great. Thank you, Angie. The next few, I'll highlight probably House Bill 222 on this bill. This is the breakfast bill you may have all heard about through social media and the news during the session. It requires that if you participate in the National School Lunch Program, you now also have to participate in the National School Breakfast Program. This impacts 95 schools out of our 1,100 schools total. So a very small amount of those schools now need to make sure they're serving breakfast. The other part of this bill does require that if you have a certain percentage of your students on free and reduced lunch, you need to make sure that breakfast is being made available after the bell. It can still continue to be made available before the bell, so you know the hour before school open. But it's a 3-year phase in, so 70% or higher on free and reduced lunch. You will need next year. You will need to have breakfast after the bell as an option. The following year, it's 50% of your students, and the third year is 30% of your students on free and reduced lunch. You'll have to have breakfast after the bell as an option. This bill does also include a waiver. We're working on a board rule right now on how you can apply for a waiver for individual schools. These other bills are not necessarily fiscal impact bills, but I will highlight House 84. It has come up a lot with being able to refer students to courts. You still can, but you have to now go through an additional step. You have to do evidence-based interventions, and now you also have to go through JJS, the juvenile justice system, and their programs before you can refer the students to courts. Otherwise, I will jump to the next slide very quickly and just ask, is there a piece of legislation from this session that you think will help you in your role, whether that is a role of a leader or as a business administrator? And you can use the chat box to kind of highlight the bills you feel like are really going to help you this session and that you're excited about in terms of making your life maybe a little bit easier. We're hoping there's some bills out there that putting a smile on your face rather than a frown. So if there's any of those, please enter those into the chat box. While you're doing that, I will pass the torch back to Angie.
My guess is that knowing a lot of you, the bill or non-bill that you would all appreciate the most is just having the WPU funded. That's my guess, just knowing this group. But if there's anything you'd like to add in there, we'd love to hear. Yeah, so Stephanie says any guaranteed funding to smooth out the budgeting. So yeah, I'm guessing HB 357, assuming it passes, would really help in the in some ways. I was actually thinking about this morning because I knew I'd be presenting to you all. And I thought, man, wouldn't it have been nice if we had HB 357, 2 years ago, so that the revenue in those out years, these high years that we had, would have been reserved for us moving forward. But anyway, it's something to look forward to in the future, is to have guaranteed funding. Anything else? It looks like Stephanie was the only brave one. So I will say that in another presentation I gave, or that Jeff and I gave, I believe it was the superintendents, and somebody said just increases to the WPU. So anyway, I'll move forward. One thing, yes, Stephanie, do you get extra funding? Maybe next time I see you, I'll give you a candy bar or something. Unfortunately, I don't have the power to give you extra funding, but if I could, you would get it. So this slide, HB 334, I'll just let you know that the civics education amendments is a pilot program, only about 3 LEAs. We have enough funding for about 3 LEAs to participate. It was just about $150,000 of funding. And this would allow LEAs to do kind of a separate project-based way to show civics engagement versus the basic civics test. So if you're interested in that, I'm sure somebody maybe in your teaching and learning department will let you know if they're interested, but there is some funding that comes with that. SB 73 provides extra funding for licenses for the Acadians, or that K3 reading assessment to be done in grades 4, 5, and 6. But that wouldn't result in any funding coming to you. It simply funds licenses at our level. The SB 93, however, the Math and Science Opportunities for Students and Teachers, this program is currently called the U-STAR program. And for many reasons, our staff wanted to rebrand from U-STAR because it was confused often with the higher education U-STAR program. And so now it's been rebranded as the Math and Science Opportunities for Students and Teachers. This program currently has about 4.8 million, and this year received an additional $1 million. We have traditionally had about $2.5 million to $3 million worth of requests that we weren't able to fund. So we're happy that there will be some extra funding to meet your reimbursement request. So this program funds extended contracts, or now it would also allow for stipends for math and science teachers to provide extended year opportunities, either an extended day or summer school opportunities, or it could be to provide a maybe a unique class setting for math and science to support students. So that program, Remember Youth Start, will now be MOST, and there's some additional funding, so you might be able to qualify for some of that. Also, if you participate or are part of a regional service center, which will now be called a RESA, a Regional Education Service Agency, this bill allows the RESAs to take a greater role in that and maybe help you manage your applications and your reimbursements for this program. Okay, next slide. So let's see, of these bills, so one thing that's interesting, HB 141 that will impact you all, or you'll want to be aware of, some of you may be aware this last fall, fall time period, the state board changed our licensing requirements for school social workers. And previously, a school social worker was required to hold 2 licenses, a DOPL license, as well as a board education license. Our board rule has changed that now so that an LEA can choose if they want to require the 2 licenses, but actually you all may hire school social workers that have only the DOPL license now. And now what HB 141 did is it allowed those school social workers who are hired and only have a DOPL license to continue to qualify for the educator salary adjustment, as well as for your qualification for the portion of for the professional staff cost program. So you'll want to know that. The reason that the board took that action is last year the system hired 50 school social workers, and only 8 of those 50 school social workers had both licenses. The majority, 42 of them, only had the DOPL license. And now it would be up to LEAs to decide if you want to, and you could hire a DOPL only licensed school social worker and then have them work towards that second license, or simply require the 1 license. The other thing that HB 141 did is that allows for us in those years when we don't have enough funding in the line item to support the TSSP program. That's the teacher salary supplement program that goes to support math, science, computer science, and teachers who work with our students with disabilities. As you may remember, this last year, we didn't have enough funding in our line item appropriation. What it would allow is us to use a carry forward from other programs to fully fund that stipend up front and not have to wait until the session to get the supplemental funding. So I see a question from Chad. Does this apply to licensed clinical social workers, or is school social worker a separate DOPL license? No, I believe that the DOPL license is a licensed clinical social worker. So what that means is you could hire somebody as a school social worker with that licensed clinical social worker license only. They wouldn't be required to get a separate school social worker license, but you could still call them a school social worker. Hopefully that's helpful. DOPL does not have, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of them having a school social worker license. So it would just be the licensed clinical social worker license from DOPL. Great question, thank you. And then HB 107, effective teachers in high poverty schools. This allows now teachers who are teaching grades 1 and 2 to also qualify for this incentive. Just as a reminder, this is it used to be $5,000 and now it's been raised up to $7,000 stipend for effective teachers in high poverty schools, LEAs have to provide half of that match. And the way that teachers in grades 1 and 2 qualify for it is based on the number of their students who reach a certain benchmark on the reading assessment, the Acadience, what you call the Dibbles assessment. Just so you know, because the board has suspended statewide assessments for this year, this spring, we do not anticipate awarding any effective teacher in high poverty school incentive awards this upcoming school year, because we would have no growth scores to determine if they met an MGP, and also the reading assessments were also suspended for this spring. So I did want to let you all know that. HB 22, I guess I would mention to you that Utah Retirement Systems Amendments, and I probably need to reach out to our HR and kind of understand the impacts on this. But what it does is it will allow those who have retired from the system to be rehired and not have their retirement, the amount that they're receiving from retirement be impacted the way it used to. So if you are planning to hire somebody who was previously retired from URS, you'll want to check to see how that would impact now the new provisions, how they'll be impacted. And I believe it's in a positive way. It'll allow you to hire people sooner and for their retirement income to be impacted less. And then HB 108 simply states that you all, it doesn't really change anything legally, but it states that you can create a separate classification, salary schedule for medical specialists like nurses, mental health workers, occupational or speech pathologists, et cetera. You all could do that anyway. This is not creating a legal right that you didn't already have. In some ways, this is kind of a message bill. It didn't even really encourage that, but it does state that you can create a separate salary schedule. So next slide. All of these are mostly about, these would be more of interest to your HR directors. It's about background checks, not allowing people who are sex offenders to work in schools or be coaches, et cetera. So I'll just skip past those, Jeff, and turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Angie. And on this slide in
And I'll look
particular-
at your question, R. Peterson. I'm not sure if it's Ryan, or I apologize. I'm not sure what your first name is. I'll take a look really quickly and see what it says about the waiting period while Jeff presents.
So I'm going to jump down to House Bill 409 in the interest of time. The first two bills just kind of change some requirements about how students qualify for scholarship. So your school counselors should be aware of those and let them know there's some changes if you want to keep them informed. House Bill 409 concurrent enrollment amendments. This allows for institution of higher ed to consider upper division courses for concurrent enrollment. Now, currently we only offer through concurrent enrollment 1,000 and 2,000 level courses. This would allow above those to be offered potentially. There aren't any currently, but now going to require a review. The thing that you'll be most interested in is this changes the distribution of, or the amount of money that we receive at USBE. It's going to now be based on the percentage of enrollment growth within concurrent enrollment programs rather than just enrollment growth generally. And this bill did come with some funding as well. There was 6.7 million total for concurrent enrollment that's combined across a couple of bills. And a chunk of that money was to fund this particular bill for the increase. So more financial incentive to increase your enrollment for concurrent enrollment. And you are encouraged in the bill to prioritize your funding for increasing enrollment with underrepresented student populations. The next bill is House Bill 336. This creates a certificate program. There isn't anything in here super financial. Again, this would be a big one for school counselors, so I'm going to kind of move past this one. Just know that it creates certificate programs that can allow students to receive transferable credits across all 8 institutions that will get them out of some of their gen ed requirements. And again, most of these are for school counselors, so I will breeze past them, but Senate Bill 151, just know that we've split out in code the accelerated student program. So now Gifted and Talented is its own program, and APIB is now called the Early College Program. And then concurrent enrollment is still its own separate program. Michelle, your hand is raised. A question?
No, I can't get this hand down, sorry.
You're good. We are excited for your enthusiasm regardless, so thank you. I will jump back to Angie now on the next slide.
All right, so it looks to me, before I go on to these two charter school bills, which I'll just talk about one really quickly, it looks like what HB 22 does is it allows somebody who retired previously to essentially cancel their retirement allowance and then continue to earn additional service credit in their reemployed position. And I haven't been able to go through the whole thing, but it looks like they may also be exempt from having to complete the 1-year separation from employment with the participating employer is what I'm trying. It's a fairly long bill. So I'm trying to get through it and understand all of the elements, but it looks to me like that's the biggest change, is that you could hire somebody who previously retired. They could elect to suspend their retirement payments and then start earning additional service credit again. So, and it looks like it's at election, so they might have a choice to do either or. And it does look like that year requirement is suspended, but I'm not sure if that's completely suspended or if it's a shorter period. So I'll see if I can, at our next break when Jeff takes over, I'll see what I can find out. The other thing I was thinking I might do is reach out to our HR director to see if URS has posted any kind of an FAQ on this bill. I would imagine they have, and then maybe we could forward that along to you also. So HB 242, the only thing of note that I'll mention, and if you go on to the next slide, HB 242 and SB 94, for the most part, only impact charter schools. There is a portion at the beginning of the bill that just talks about all LEAs, including districts, following GASB and using the same financial reporting requirements. Essentially, what that means for you is nothing is going to change. It does impact our charter schools, however, in that most of them are currently using FASB to report. They're using the FASB accounting standards, and now they also will be using GASB in addition to districts. So the rest of the one other thing I'll just mention that's pretty, I think is interesting, is that now when charter schools, new charter schools are approved, they'll be approved on kind of a 3-year probational or initial agreement approval, and then they receive their ongoing or final approval after about 3 to 5 years, which is a big change. So, all right, let's move forward because so this is another just quick question to get you guys thinking and maybe participating. If you could provide your comments in the box. Did any of you have a personal experience related to a piece of legislation that was noteworthy? And in your case, it could be a piece of legislation or a funding request that was funded that was noteworthy. So I'm not saying, I don't know if we can count on Stephanie to throw something in there. If you had any experiences, Stephanie, or if any of the rest of you maybe presented to public ed approach or had an experience with the legislator reaching out to you, any experiences you want to share with the group would be great. Hopefully you all had positive experiences this year with your legislators. Or with a committee or that you presented to. So I will just keep moving because we are already at 10 o'clock and we don't want to take too much time of your time. So the next couple of slides talk about funding and taxes. So you may be interested in these bills. As I mentioned before, HB 77 education funding amendments caps the amount of property tax that will be generated related to a WPU increase. As you know, for every 1%, approximately 5% property taxes are raised and deposited into the TSSA account. This bill caps that at 4%, so only the property tax matching would only apply to the first 4% of the WPU increased. SB 104, the Local Education Levy State Guarantee Amendments Bill. This bill now provides that up to 20 increments of property tax are guaranteed for purposes of the voted and local levies, whereas currently it's at 16. And so for those of you who participate or are recipients of that local guarantee program funding, you'll now be able to qualify for additional funding for those additional property tax increments if you're participating and levying that property tax amount. HB 434, funding for necessarily existent small schools and rural schools amendments, has kind of two different portions to the bill. The first part, the portions of the bill that impact the NESS program, are fairly technical, and they were recommendations made by the NESS work group that Scott Jones and Dale Frost and others worked. Some of you may have worked on that. The second part of HB 434, though, creates a $100,000 reimbursement program for schools that are located within a county of the 4th, 5th, or 6th class. And what this program does is, if you have travel costs related to an extracurricular or co-curricular activity, you may be able to have those travel costs reimbursed by our office, and we will give we're required by the bill to provide priority for programs or experiences that are in the area of the arts. And so if we have more requests than we have funding, we will prioritize those requests that are related to art program opportunities. And then SB 113, arts program funding amendments. This bill requires us to report to the Public Education Appropriations Committee every year funding requests related to the Beverly Taylor Arts Sorensen program. Then that program also received $4 million of increased funding this year. This is the Beverly Taylor Arts program. All right, next slide. SB 202, this bill allows you all to make adjustments to your financial reports in accordance with GAAP or the generally accepted accounting principles, and you are allowed to make those adjustments during the fiscal year in which you're reporting, as well as at the end of the fiscal year you're reporting. If you have questions, more detailed questions about SB 202 and what it did, feel free to ask, and I think Scott Jones, he'd be a great person to reach out to on that. I see a question in here. It looks like SB 104. The amount of state guarantee money that a school district would otherwise be entitled to receive under the section may not be reduced for the sole reason that the school district's board local levy or voted local levy is reduced as a consequence of changes in the certified tax rate. So that's an interesting, so normally, especially for the voted levy, you're kind of held harmless for 5 years. So this is, I guess I'm understanding, maybe it's a question or maybe it's just a comment that, go ahead.
Angie,
Yeah.
this is Paul. I posed that question out there, but it ended up more as a comment. But with this SB 104 moving to 0.002, and I see that the state tax commission's already got that changed on the certified tax rate website. So those of us that set the 1.6, do we go through another voted process to get to that ceiling, or can we just go through truth in taxation to get that ceiling?
My guess is, and Scott can correct me if I'm wrong, that what that section that you just put up in the comment box is referring to, you would have to raise it up to the 0.002. But let's say after you did that, due to the certified tax rate in out years, it reduced a little bit due to truth and taxation. So from 0.002, maybe it went to 0.00194 or something like that. I think that language is talking about when the amount your levy is reduced due to the certified tax rate. Not, I don't think that you could be at 0.0016 and then all of a sudden get the increments up to 0.002 unless and until you actually raise your property tax to match that.
So
Correct.
besides truth and taxation, we would have to go to a vote to our
Or a
public.
vote, if it's the voted levy.
Okay.
That's right. Yep.
But that's a good reminder in those out years after, if it reduces, then yeah, you would be held harmless, but you do need to bring it up to the 0.002 at some point. Okay, Jeff, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you.
Okay, really quick, I'm just going to highlight on this slide House Bill 14 for any of you who do the operations side as well as finance and have to do some of the data reporting. House Bill 14 creates some uniform definitions of what is an absence when it comes to accounting for truancy. And it also requires an LEA report to the state board, absences with a valid excuse and absences without a valid excuse. Currently, LEAs are only reporting absences, and the state board does not know what kind of absences they're looking at. So those are some of the bigger changes in House Bill 14. The other bill I'll highlight is House Bill 376 for any of you who have to do the dropout prevention program. This expands the list of LEAs that could be exempt from that program. Jump over to the next slide. I know House Bill 67 is a big one. I'll pass it back to Angie.
Thank you. Sorry, took a minute for me to find the unmute button. HB 67 is the bill that provides funding. It's Local Education Agency Financial Information Systems. This is Representative Ballard's bill that provides funding $4 million to us to provide either a reimbursement, a grant, or potentially do a collective kind of contract at the state level. We're still trying to figure out what that would look like, but it allows you to receive funding to offset the costs of approved financial systems. So you would have to be using a financial system that USBE approves as one of the approved vendors. We will provide more information on this, how this will work and roll out as we work on the rule. We don't have the details on this one yet, but we're looking forward to providing that funding to you all to support your financial systems. SB 124, American Indian and Alaskan Native Education Amendments. This mostly, those of you who are already participating in this program, what it did is it removed the pilot status of 2 programs that provide funding for incentives to schools who have a high population of students who are American Indian and Alaskan Native. Okay, next slide, Jeff.
Great, and I'm going to hopefully, Kim, this is for you. Let me know if it is or isn't. House Bill 72 very quickly just creates a legislative commission on digital wellness and citizenship, and they'll make policy recommendations to the board. And House Bill 360 just changes our early learning reading platform code and allows us to kind of use some of the money internally for administrative cost. We received a separate appropriation for the Learn platform, so we wanted to free up some of the other money. That's about it. These next ones, if any of you deal with your busing or deal with your fleet, just know that House Bill 143, the Highway Patrol now only has to inspect 20% of your bus fleet rather than all of it. And then if a certain amount of the 20% fail the inspection, they will then do a full every bus inspection, but this will just allow them to do a sampling rather than all of them. In House Bill 84, just don't speed pass a bus because the fine has increased if you do when the flashing lights are on. So that could mean more revenue in a sense because you all get a portion of that fine. But that, we'll pass it back to Angie.
Do you all want to take a quick break before we finish? And I'm looking for Scott to kind of give me some indication here what he'd like. I'll just let you know what we have left. We'll talk about these school fees bills. We only have about 1 or 2 or 3 bills after that, and then we could show you the materials we have. So if you can all hang in there, I would guess that Jeff and I have no more than 5 or 10 minutes left in our presentation, and we could take a break. If that sounds good, that's what I will move forward with, unless I see Scott or Leon or Todd or somebody else give me a different direction in the chat box. So I'll just move forward then for now with these 2 school fees bills and let you know what they did. First, HB 80, it requires our office to collect a lot of data elements related to school fees. And as many of you know, Representative Robertson, who was the sponsor of this bill, has been very interested in knowing the amount of school fees that are collected to fund curricular activities, which what I would call is your regular school day course related fees, your co-curricular activities, and then your extracurricular activities. The reason he is interested in that is I believe he would like to seek an appropriation at some point to fund the cost of curricular fees so that you all would not be required to charge fees for courses and programs that happen during the regular school day, and that fees would be limited to those co-curricular, extracurricular costs. Hopefully that's helpful for you to understand why he is asking for this data. But anyway, that's kind of the why behind the data collection. My understanding is that we will, Tammy Daly has told me that our intent is to collect that data along with the certification that we do in the fall, is to do that all at once and collect the data at the same time as we do your school fees certifications. The other thing that HB 80 did is it amended the definition of school activity clothing. It deleted the words color and imprint, or color and style, I apologize. It kept imprint, but deleted color and style and replaced that with brand, so that there was some question about what happens if you ask students to all wear a white shirt one day, or everybody wear all black for a certain assembly or choir concert or something, but you don't necessarily require the same black dress, meaning the same style. That the idea would be to allow you all to continue to ask students to wear clothes that might be commonly found at home, like a white shirt or a black shirt or something like that. And then I see a comment from Chris, data collection should be part of our financial data uploads to UPEFs, not in a certification. Okay, that's good feedback. I will let Tammy know and see what we can do as far as getting that data through a method that you're already, where you're already submitting data. So I know she plans to work on that with our data and ops team to make that as easy as possible. So that's good feedback. And then HB 391, this bill was run by Representative Lisenby. It simply codifies the definitions of instructional equipment, instructional supplies, and textbook that we had in our board rule R277407. You'll remember that last spring and summer we worked on the definition of textbook, and the statutory definition of textbook was so broad, and as a reminder, beginning with the 22-23 school year, you will no longer be allowed to charge fees for textbooks. If we did not codify those terms that we worked on this last year into code, you would not have been able to charge fees for things like a piece of band equipment, like a trumpet, or maybe wood for wood shop. So now, with textbooks, the definitions being changed, you will be able to still charge fees for those, the instructional equipment and instructional supplies. They will, however, still be subject to fee waiver as they were before. So, and I see more agreement with Chris's comment to see if we can get make those reporting requirements under school fees to be as less burdensome as possible. So we will do that. I'll pass that feedback on to Tammy. Okay. All right, Jeff.
Yes, really quick, there's not much on this slide that has financial impact, but I will highlight Senate Bill 79 for anyone who is a member of a regional service center. As Angie mentioned before, this bill creates what we're calling RESAs or RESAs, the Regional Education Service Agencies. It will allow your regional service center to act as an LEA and apply to grants and other programs, providing that all of the members within the regional service center agree to have them apply on their behalf. So if you have a few members that do not want the regional service center to apply on their behalf, it's kind of an all or nothing thing within the bill. But it is a great opportunity for those who are members of regional service center to kind of get more of a consortium approach to some of these grant programs. The rest of these, one thing in Senate Bill 21, a lot of technical changes, but this does allow for the annual teacher salary supplement program. They don't have to apply annually anymore. This would allow them to just apply and be in the system. I'll pass it back to Angie.
One thing I will mention about that last bill, however, is currently our systems are not set up yet for those who qualify for the TSSP program to apply once. That will begin with the 21-22 school year. So for now, for this 2021 school year, even if they did apply in the past, they will need to reapply again and then actually reapply one more time in 21-22. And then we think by then our systems will be updated to allow that one application to serve as their request moving forward. And then, so now on this next slide here, I think out of all the bills on this slide, the only thing I will mention, SB 166, some of you may have been aware of the fact that you all were required to report your law enforcement incidents that occurred on your campuses that involved law enforcement were supposed to be reported to us for purposes of making a big report this July 1, 2020. We were able to work with Senator Andrade to push that back by 3 years. So I just wanted to mention that because I know some of you are also very involved with your data teams and IT, and that's a bill that might be of interest to you. The rest of the bills on here, I don't, any funding impacts that there are related to our office's funding, and I think the rest are more policy in nature. So let's go to the last slide. And just, you can see here, we will again post these later on and the links will be there to these resources. But Jeff, will you also go ahead and go to the legislative landing page on our website? You'll be able to see the scrolling banner legislative session summary there. Click on that and it will take you to this landing page here. Jeff is showing, he's kind of got his cursor there, which shows the 2020 public education summary. That's the electronic version of what we call the bill book. And it does have some financial information as well included at the beginning of the bill book. However, all of that is based on what happened during the 2020 legislative session. And if there are any changes later this month, more likely in June, we're hearing of any kind of fiscal changes, this is all subject to change. And I'm sure you all know that. And we've been telling you that there's likely going to be changes coming, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other thing that's on there, there's a quick guide that you could use. Again, it's a little bit more policy heavy. It does have kind of the basic financial elements in there as well as the programs that were funded. But if you're ever doing say a review with your board and you wanted to do just a quick overview of what happened this session, this might be a resource you could use. And we do plan to post this PowerPoint sometime this week here on this page as well, so you could refer to it at a later date and use it if you find it helpful for your own purposes. And the PowerPoint should have links to the bills in there as well. So that's essentially the 2020 session overview. Do any of you have any questions for me, Scott, or Jeff, any of the three of us, before we talk about the special sessions and moving forward? Okay, I don't see any questions, Scott. So at this point, should we maybe take a little break before we move into the next section of the agenda, Scott? Or Leon, I'll defer to either of you two to let me know what you'd like next.
Leon, are you okay if we take about 10 minutes just to let everybody stretch and get reset? Okay.
All right, sounds like we'll come back at 10:35. I'll put that in the chat box.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get back going again. I want to talk to you just real quick about, usually by this time each year we'd have legislative summaries out, or I'm sorry, legislative estimates out to you. So, for the first part of this meeting, we had Angie cover, basically what all the great things that happened as part of the session. Now, as we all know, those are subject to change. So, we're just all going to have to keep our eyes on the, the upcoming special session. So we had one, and, I'll turn it back over to Angie here in a minute just to talk about, the outcomes of the special session last week, where we're at with waivers, both board and legislative status, if you will. So, here's what we've been talking about internally here at the USBE is I think I'm going to go ahead and have the staff post the legislative estimates as long as everyone will recognize that they're all subject to change, and that likely we really won't have, what the concrete changes are until what I'm hearing will be a special session around the June timeframe. When exactly in June, I'm not sure, but that's where we're headed. So, and then from Richard, to your question about the board policy versus a resolution on paying paraprofessionals, I'll get to the policy pieces, and that's those types of questions in item number 5 of the agenda. But let me hear from you in the chat room. Are you all supportive of us going ahead and posting the legislative estimates based on what information we have at this time? And then everyone, all of us recognizing that they're all subject to change, or it's all subject to change. Okay. Good, Zane, thanks. Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and have have the staff post those right away. I do need to let you know, as far as the revenue estimates go, or the information that we rely on heavily from the tax commission. So we found out today that we're still waiting on some information, or they're still waiting on information. For example, information from Salt Lake County, and then just a few other counties related to some of the other information that they need in order to turn that over to us. But I'll defer to Patrick and Jake to drill down on what specifically we're waiting for from the tax commission when we get to their particular item. So, okay, great. It seems like everybody's on board with us going forward with posting the legislative estimates. Again, all of us recognizing that those are subject to change. So, Angie, if I can, or Deputy Superintendent Stallings, if I could turn it back over to you, can you, let us know what the outcomes from, your vantage point, our vantage point was from the special session, where we stand at this time with waivers?
Great, thank you. If you'll just give me a minute, I'm just starting to share my screen, so I just need to make a couple of adjustments here with my screen. And hopefully you can see right now, I'm not planning to start with this, but you can see Sorry, I'm just trying to get this so that it doesn't block my screen sharing. It won't let me. So, and I'm also going to turn this chat on, move this over. It looks like Cami said she can see R27419. So great, you all can see my screen. Just moving this over as well. I apologize. Thank you for giving me a second to just adjust here. You know how it is when you start sharing a screen. Just wanted to move things out of the way so that's not blocking your view. So why don't we go ahead and start with what happened this last session, which happened last Thursday and Friday. And I'll just mention a couple of things about what I know about the special session so you all also are on the same page. You probably saw that the call had quite a few bills on it or items. There were like 21 different items. And what the legislature did when they called themselves into this special session is they planned to have it open for 10 days and come back and forth during those 10 days. So you probably notice that they aren't meeting concurrently, meaning they'll have the House meet in the morning and then the Senate in the afternoon. And that's so that they can have their staff can facilitate all of the electronic needs related to having a special session that is electronic only. So I noticed this morning when I looked at their calendar that it looks like they will be coming back into recess. So they didn't adjourn on Friday, but they instead just recessed until it looks like Thursday morning. They'll come back to their special session. It looks like the House again will start in the morning and the Senate in the afternoon. All of the bills that we were tracking, with the exception of one, they were considered and passed during the last week's special session. So the one policy-wise that we were tracking, and I pulled up HB 305, but I meant to track SB 305. I apologize. Let me grab that quickly. The SB 305 is the bill that supported the board's motion to suspend assessment requirements and also eliminated some other, for example, the educator evaluation requirements, including reporting. So if you notice mine come up yellow, I apologize, that might be distracting for some of you, but I've got kind of a toggle or a macro. I can take it off actually. There we go. It highlights new language in yellow and deleted language in red. But now I've toggled that off. So you can see that there's a waiver of the employee evaluation requirements for this school year, and that includes the reporting requirements. We've also allowed a waiver for assessments to be administered this year, and those assessments would be our RISE assessments, Utah Aspire Plus, as well as any of the K through 3 reading benchmark assessments. And then it waives also the basic civics test graduation requirement for certain students if they apply to us for a waiver. And we understand that the lion's share of our students, 99.9% of them, have already taken that basic civics test. Most of them take it either in their 8th grade year or their junior year. But if there are a couple of students who were not able to take it due to access, they can seek a waiver from us. But we also understand that LEAs are able to provide this basic civics test even in a distance setting. So you can see that the bill also waives certain reporting requirements, and we will be providing a report to the legislature, specifically to the Education Interim Committee in October, and we will report on what we were or weren't able to comply with related to the assessment waiver. So that was the big bill that we asked for, and it did pass both houses last week. Two other bills that passed, there's a resolution, you can see HJR 301, which urges fiscal responsibility and asks us to move forward assuming base budget was funded versus the end of year budget. And SB 301, pandemic response appropriation adjustments. I am not as familiar about how this might have impacted us as Scott would. I don't know, Scott, would you like to speak to SB 3001?
Yeah, so we'll drill down this on 3001 a little bit more when we turn it over to Patrick and Jake.
Okay.
But then even after this meeting, we're gonna go through it all and then communicate out what, down to the granular level detail, what the impacts of 3001 are. Yeah.
So what else I can move forward to then? Another bill that we're anticipating, but we haven't seen at all, is we understand that HB 332, some of you may remember that was the bill that created a new special needs scholarship program where we would be contracting with a scholarship granting organization to administer that, and it would have allowed people to donate to that scholarship granting organization and to receive a tax credit. And that money would be used to support students with disabilities in participating in private school and getting other resources paid for. That bill, as you know, was vetoed by the governor. And the legislature has been considering a veto override. It has not been called yet, meaning they haven't noticed a veto override session. That would have to be noticed separately from the special session. They have until about May 10th or 11th to bring themselves into a veto override session. But from the call of this special session, we can see that there's also, they've at least signaled their intent to run a bill to change that HB 332 to something else. We've been told that Representative Schultz has been working with the governor's office on a draft bill, and we have not seen a draft of that bill yet, but we hope we'll get to see it before it's numbered. But I would anticipate that there's a good chance that this Thursday you might see a bill to amend HB 332 in lieu of a veto override session, but that's all remains to be seen to see what happens with those. All right, well, that's about all I'm going to provide on the special session. I know at one point Scott wanted me to talk to you all about the waivers that the board has granted. So I'll briefly go through those and just let you know about. So somebody wants to know, Scott, and I think you'd probably be the best one to answer this. Can you help us interpret HJR 301 and the message for our school boards? Is that what would you also like to wait for that until you turn the time over to Patrick, Scott?
Yeah, we're going to do that. We'll now that I know, the input from the group on, posting the legislative estimates, we have a plan on how to support, HJR 301, but then also try to give you enough lead time, the districts enough lead time to do exactly what John's pointing out, for the messaging to the school boards, especially as it relates to at least the first allotment that you'll get, the July allotment. We'll talk about that when we get to Patrick and Jake.
Great. So I'll just go over the waivers, the quote unquote policy side of all of this before we turn it over to Patrick. So go over the waivers from board rule that our board passed on March 19th, April 2nd, and April, what was it, 19th, 17th? Sorry, I'm trying to remember. It was just last week, last Thursday. But first, many of you may be familiar with the motion that the board took on May 19th, which was to waive the 180 school day and 990 hour requirement of our 277419. It also, they waived the allowance for you all to change your school calendar and not have to do that in an open meeting. It also waived the transportation requirements, which require LEAs to record and submit student transportation costs, miles and minutes. And that will be now up to USBE staff to determine what evidence or how that will be recorded. And then also, there was a separate motion that suspended all assessments, including the requirement to administer a third benchmark reading assessment. So the rest of the assessment requirements are all in code, which were suspended in SB 3005. So that there's kind of the portion that we had in rule, the board suspended, and then the portion that was in statute, the legislature waived or suspended. So you can see there's a number of deadlines that were also pushed back by 2 months here, including the requirement for you to adopt your fee schedule by April 1 and to have 2 public meetings or hearings on your fee schedule. So that was suspended. Also, you can see the emergency preparedness issues, if you have any questions about those. But all of the waivers that you saw above are all conditioned on you following local health official orders and timelines for dismissal, soft closure, or complete closure of schools, as well as submitting and following your school closure continuity of education plan. So what that means is the expectation is that you continue to provide instruction or education to your students in accordance with your school closure continuity of education plan, in accordance with your regular school calendar. So if you were planning to have your last day of school be May 30th or May 29th or June 7th, whatever that date was, that you would continue to provide supports and instruction to your students through the end of your regular calendar year. And also to continue to provide notice and communication to your families. And also that the motion directed us as staff to continue to distribute state funding. So that was the first and biggest waiver. And related to that, I'll just raise to your attention this R277419 that was presented to finance last Friday. This board rule was kind of the second part of the board waiver. I apologize, I should have scrolled down to this before. Hopefully I'm not making any of you sick as I'm scrolling. But there's a section of code where we address how our staff will be counting membership for this time period between March 16th and June 30th of this year. So you can see here, this is what was reviewed by the Finance Committee last Friday, that notwithstanding the requirements of other portions of R277419, which require you to essentially either do an attendance verification or to use some other continuing enrollment measurement in order to measure your membership, that for this period, the superintendent will calculate, and when it says the superintendent, that means all of USBE, the staff, will calculate an LEA's membership for days of instruction between March 16th and June 30th, based on the LEA's average rate of attendance between July 1, 2019 and March 13th, 2020. And you also have to have submitted a continuity of education plan, just as I mentioned before. And the expectation is that you would be continuing to provide instruction in accordance with that continuity of education plan. So Brent has a question, which is how does the 180-day, 990-hour waiver and the continuation of education plan work together? The idea is that while you are no longer in your school buildings providing instruction as you traditionally would, where you're able to take attendance, we understand that you may have families who are more engaged than others. You may have families that do a number of days, or students who do, for example, 2 or 3 days of work in one day and maybe don't even engage on 1 or 2 days a week. And so instead of taking attendance daily, the expectation is that you all are following your continuity of education plans and that you are providing instruction through some sort of means, and that as long as you are doing that, that your membership for that time period, as you can see in this updated R277419, will be attributed based on your average from July 1 through March 13th of this last year. So while we're here talking about this, I'll just give a little shout out for my district. Leon, hopefully is here. I know I'm pretty sure he is, but Kenyon School Districts, that's where my kids attend. I have 3 kids. They've done a fantastic job of communicating with families. My kids are doing modules through Canvas. They also have some other iReady, other applications that they're using, but Kenyon's has done a really good job of keeping my kids engaged. They have opportunities for the class to interact through Zoom, stuff like that. So the expectation is that you all are engaging your families and your students the best you can. And hopefully that answers your question, Brent. And it's kind of a 2-part. It's the waiver, well, 3-part. It's the waiver, your continuity of education plan, and then seeing how this is going to impact you in the out years. Because as many of you know, your membership for this year determines how much funding you get in, say, a year or 2 years down the road. A lot of our funding formulas are based on membership in the years prior. So one of the questions, another question that I received that will probably a better question for Scott to answer is, will you be sending out information to auditors on these exceptions for when they verify counts? Yeah, well, the auditors, for example, this R277419, the auditors would receive this. They'd know that this was the expectation and that the board passed not only the waivers that I mentioned before, but this R277419. So yes, they will be aware of it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Ange. Yep.
Okay, great. I'll move on to, hold on just a sec. I've got to find the screen where I had all those. Okay, then the second, I'll quickly go over the last 2 sets of waivers, April 2nd and the waivers on April 17th, 16th. I apologize, I keep forgetting the date of our board meeting last week. They're mostly waivers related to licensing requirements as well as educator evaluation requirements. So you can see that now for those of your educators or those who have licenses, their time period for which they have to renew their license has been extended to October 31st, 2020. Understand that a lot of the background check facilities or places where they are closed right now. And so almost all of these requirements are waivers related to either the educator and employee evaluation requirements as well as licensing. And the same goes for the waivers on April 16th. They were all, one was about international guest teachers. I'll just mention this. We've heard from those of you who have international guest teachers that simply delaying the renewal until October 31st is not sufficient. And so what the board granted the superintendent the authority to extend international guest teacher licenses that were expiring on June 30th of 2020 to be extended up to a year. And this is to allow them to have a license in place that would work for purposes of them potentially needing to renew their visas. So, and then you can see the request for statutory changes that the board made. A lot of these are not really important now, mostly because you can see that the bill passed already that allowed for a lot of these changes to happen. And we provided the legislature with a list of sections of code that would be impacted by not having assessments this spring or not administering the statewide assessments. And so all of these here were tied to that language in SB 3005, meaning the whole public education system, not to comply with certain requirements due to the suspension of statewide assessments. And then we will make a report to the legislature in October. The last, I think, section, and I pulled it up already. I may not have. I was going to just pull up the waiver that the board passed this last time. Here it is right here. I believe they are all licensing. So it's educator evaluation again. Like, oh, the school land trust plan. Here's one that you might be interested. For this calendar year, the May 15th deadline for school district plans to be approved by your local school boards. It's normally May 15th, and that has been moved back to September 15th. And one other thing, I think there was one section of code that we are working on asking the legislature to spend. Let me hurry and pull that up. I apologize, I didn't get these pulled up in advance. I know one was related to the Centennial Scholarship, which I don't think you'll care about. Oh, we've had a request from some of our health teachers to delay the requirement for LEAs to offer the underage drinking and substance abuse prevention program to students in grades 4 and 5. And instead of starting this fall, to have that be another year. So another question is, did you cover the fiscal year approval dates of June 30th? You know, Scott, remind me, so there was a bill, it was 3001, which originally it may be there, 3002, maybe it was HB 3001 or 3002, which was going to extend the deadlines back for the June 30th. And sorry, I'm trying to, it's not pulling up right now, but my is that bill is being delayed to see what funding changes or impacts will need to be made. So HB 2002 was the bill, and this bill would have pushed back those June 30 deadlines to August 15th, but they have not moved on that bill because what they're planning to do is wait until they actually have to make any kind of funding adjustments and then determine the deadlines for you to submit those budgets at that time. And Scott can speak to that in more detail, and all of that might be related to what Patrick going to cover. So I think at this point, I've pretty much covered everything I plan to cover unless you have any questions. So if you want to send me any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll turn the time back over to you, Scott.
Okay, thanks, Angie. Cami, can you pull the agenda back up just so we can do an azimuth check here and make sure we're, following the right direction here as far as, where we're at on the agenda? Okay, so we've basically covered items number 1, 2, 3 with the special session summary and the waivers that, and 3A. So now let's talk about item 3B, which is, the state fiscal year 21 budget implications. So to Angie's point, they are holding off on that bill on extending budget deadlines. The budget deadlines with your boards, with the June 30th deadlines until they convene again and really see how deep the impacts are for the state fiscal year 21 budget. Now, for all intensive purposes, what we were told was all the appropriations for state fiscal year 21 are in place until such a time as they reconvene, to Angie's point, and determine what, if any, changes will be made. Now, we are anticipating changes. How deep those changes are going to be, no one knows yet. As you all know, it's going to depend a lot on, what the legislature receives by way of revenue estimates. You're probably all aware that they extended the income tax filing deadline into July. So that's an obvious second and third level effect on income tax revenue by way of that particular extension. So I wouldn't say that they're not going to extend the deadlines. Again, I think they're just waiting to see, how much of it, again, how deep the impacts will be and how much of the appropriations they need to change for state fiscal year 21. Could mean, WPU goes from 6% to 4%, 6% to 2%. We just really don't know at this point. Again, going back to my earlier question, we're going to go ahead and post our estimates, our legislative estimates, based on the information we have, but basically caveat or condition that everything's subject to change pending that next session or that special session where the legislature takes action based on the data that they receive and that's being gathered during this between now and then. So with that, then we wanted to get into, and hopefully answer John's earlier question. Well, how do we communicate this? How do we get the word out? How do we set budgets and follow timelines, given that, there's so much uncertainty out there? So what I'd like to do is go ahead and turn it over for item 3C to School Finance Director Patrick Lee and our MSP Coordinator Jake Altrow. They have a slide, or basically just a discussion point slide that they'll put up when Cami turns it over to them. So Patrick, Jake, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Cami, I think, is going to try and share that slide so you all can see that here, and then we'll get going. Okay. So I will talk a little bit about one of the questions that was in the chat, House Joint Resolution 301, kind of interpreting that. And I'm sure we'll have more and more questions coming out of that, but it is obviously connected to some of what a lot of what they did in Senate Bill 3001, and then of course what will yet be decided and determined in a subsequent special session, most likely. But I actually want to go back and just read a few of the lines from House Joint Resolution 301, particularly who it is addressed to, relating, now therefore be it resolved that the legislature of the state of Utah urge state agencies, state and local government entities, state boards, including the State Board of Education and the Board of Regents, institutions of higher education and technical colleges, and local education agencies to do the following. First item, limit expenditures to essential costs during the remainder of the fiscal year that ends on June 30th, 2020. And so, of course, what they did in Senate Bill 3001 affects that, removing some of the balances that could have been utilized and relying instead upon the remaining existing budgets that were appropriated for the current fiscal year. The next step, avoid unnecessary spending during the remainder of the fiscal year that ends on June 30th, 2020. I think that part is pretty obvious, just trying to stay the course until we get to the end of the fiscal year, not any added spending in or things of that nature. Next line, refrain from committing to new or expanded expenditures for the fiscal year beginning on July 1, 2020 and ending on June 30th, 2021, notwithstanding current budgets. Next, begin planning for a budget for the fiscal year that begins on July 1, 2020 and ends on June 30th, 2021 that may be equal to or less than the previous year's budget. So, I mean, the things that we have essentially discussed, if we go over to Senate Bill 3001, the pandemic response appropriations adjustments. What they did there, 20 million from the basic school program. There's also 10.6 million from the related to basic. And so I just need to bring up one other document here with my notes. Excuse me for a quick sec. So the 10.6 million from the related to basic school program, that includes 8 million from the current year charter school local replacement, and the remaining 2.6 million from uncommitted balances remaining in programs, and those are yet to be determined or identified. So as we get into this may result in some fewer opportunities for grants to LEAs potentially. That's not absolutely for certain, but it depends on some of the changes that may occur in a follow-up special session. And then of course, how the revenue estimates are looking. What I'd like to do is kind of with that platform, have Jake Houtrow speak to how these actions are likely going to affect the fiscal year 21 initial estimates and allocations. So I'll turn a few minutes over to Jake as well.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Jake Houtrow, MSP Administrator. So yeah, as Deputy Superintendent Jones kind of mentioned, we'll be releasing the FY21 estimates that are based on the appropriations that are set forth, that were set forth at the conclusion of the 2020 general session. However, we got some kind of clarification from the legislative fiscal analysts that we should also make a separate set of estimates using the House Bill 1 appropriations that were essentially the ongoing FY20 funds plus the enrollment growth cost estimates included. So I guess the kind of the two major things to look for are the estimates based on the conclusion of the 2020 general session, and then a separate set. And I'll hopefully have those out in the next week or two. With the HB1 estimates that I'll be doing, the WP value, we would keep that currently at the FY20 rate of $3,532. That was the big question on my mind is, should we use the 3,745 or 3,532? And you'll see both of those values used in those two estimates that I'll do. That we'll have to make is that we will estimate local revenues with a basic rate of 0.0016 without factoring in the WPU rate. And in the voted and board programs, we will be keeping the appropriation of funding for equalization. And again, that was all discussed with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office. Up in the air, as you know, is the legislature conducts these special sessions in the coming weeks or month. But for now, I think the plan is for the July period 1 allotment. That will most likely reflect the appropriations from House Bill 1. So essentially that second set of estimates with the WP value of 3,532. So if anyone has any questions about that, again, I am nearly complete with these estimates, and I'll just have to do some adjusting of various financial inputs as I look to complete these over the next couple of weeks, but plan on having them relatively soon. That being said, is there any questions? If not, I can turn this back over to Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Yeah, so I saw Paul's question. Yes, yeah, Paul, we're looking at it as direction from the legislative fiscal analyst Patrick, or from the legislature, with the resolution, and then also, you know, I mean, we know the LFA can't necessarily direct us, but the resolution itself is what we're tracking and, you know, to follow to establish that, you know, it's the 3,532 and to set the July allotment in accordance with HB1. Now, we're anticipating that, you know, it's all about timing. So when the special session takes place, you know, again, you know, not for sure knowing how deep or what exactly is going to get changed, if and when or whatever does get changed, we feel like we would probably have sufficient time to basically modify, you know, or beginning with the August allotment, get on track with whatever comes out of the special session. So now we do understand, and this is a lot of the reason why, you know, Angie paused to make sure that, you know, you were all aware that they were holding off on the bill on, you know, filing debt, or your budget deadlines, things like that. And I also see too, you know, the truth in taxation, you know, with those types of issues, you know, the tax certifications, things like that. We are going to do our level best to make sure that, you know, as we progress with the legislature into the special session, and then again, depending on what they discuss and then, you know, ultimately pass, to try to allow for as much flexibility in timelines and you know, due dates and things like that to help support you guys as much as possible locally with your boards. You know, going back to John's earlier question, John Larson's earlier question about how do we message this? Well, you know, based on the resolution, the meetings we've had with the LFA, what you see in front of you, you know, and what we've proposed to you is in line with, you know, what we interpret as direction based on HJR 301 from the legislature to set conditions going into state fiscal year 21, you know, based on, again, the uncertainty that we're all dealing with up until and including the special session. So I'll just pause here and see. I see that you guys are, you know, talking about, you know, what you guys are going to do. You know, what NEBO's planning on doing. Go ahead and post any particular questions into the chat room right now. You know, related to what you're seeing in front of you. It'll give you a second to you know, process what the slide that's in front of you, the FY 2021 initial allocations and budgets. So. Any questions or concerns with what we've presented here to you now? It'll evolve, I'm sure. Let's see, with these requests, Stephanie, can you go ahead and unmute your mic and ask that question, or are you guys just doing this internally between you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess what I'm asking is the HJR 301, where it's stating, please be physically responsible, avoid unnecessary expending, particularly refrain from committing new or expanded expenditures. Are they really just stating this towards the state funding, or are they trying to also say, hey, school boards, take this into consideration with your tax levies as well?
I think it's both. I really do. I would say it's mostly, you know, or heavier towards the state side, but you know, I don't anticipate, you know, on the tax side much impact, or you know, not as much as on the state side. But I think they're probably saying both, but more heavily towards the state side to answer the question. So
Okay,
the best
thank
I
you.
can. Yeah.
Thanks.
Let's see, someone asked an earlier question about, will we still need to notify the USB that we're going through if we are unsure at this time? No, I mean, you know, this goes to my point, you know, of, you know, we're going to support you. We're going to back you up. You know, I mean, we're not going to, you know, if a deadline's missed, or, you know, I mean, obviously we want to do things and always do what right is, right? By the public, by your board members, by your students, everything. But, you know, my guidance and my direction to staff, and also whatever, however slight it may be, influence I have on our internal audit, things like that, we're really going to make sure that we're doing our level best to support you in this time of uncertainty, and not unnecessarily hamper you with, hey, you didn't meet this deadline, or you didn't, you know, you didn't do this. We get it. We understand everything that you know is impacted by this, although we don't know, you know, quite yet all the details, or you know, how deep this goes. We're on your side. We're really trying to demonstrate that to you, and we're not gonna you know, hold you to something that just really is impossible to do, you know, given the circumstances. So I hope that helps. Let's see. So do we agree on two budgets? Yes. Yeah. So John, that's, yeah, good point there. That's really basically what we've, you know, and Patrick and Jake can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what we're hearing from the LFA. We agree to that, you know, basically two budget scenarios. FY21 is as it is now, and then, you know, whatever adjustments, and then FY21 at the FY20 levels. Well, and so I'd flip those. I would, you know, initial budget FY21 at the 20 levels, and then we'll adapt the FY21, our budgets. You know, I have my own budget. You obviously know that up here at USBE internally, but we'll adapt depending on what the outcomes of the special session are. So, you know, that's the best we can do, but I think we're all tracking together. Let's see, what's Rachel saying? Was this? Yes. Yes, Rachel. So everyone, this is recorded. So Cami will send you the link to the recording after this. So yes, yeah, definitely. We want to make sure, and we'll make sure, as Angie pointed out, that you get a copy of the slides. Patrick will send this FY 2021 initial allocation and budget slide out to you as well. So you're very welcome. Thank you for your patience. Let's see, I'm just going to scroll through here. If I missed anything. I think some of this is a lot. You guys were just kind of going back and forth with everybody on TNT. Let's see. All right. So I'll go ahead and let's see. What is your advice for Yes. Okay. So our advice on the contract negotiations is, well, our initial advice was to delay them as much as possible. What does that mean? And not having to experience or go through what you do at the local level. That may be easy enough for us to say. But if it's possible, with the two budget scenarios, if it's possible, and not, again, I know it's a timing issue with a lot of things, with everything. If there's a possibility that your educators could wait until after we settle with the legislature on, the state fiscal year 21 impacts and changes, I mean, I think that would be ideal. Or, back to the two budget scenarios, if you maybe, I don't know, enter into agreements, based on what the appropriation levels are now with that big clause or caveat, or it's conditional, on the changes that are upcoming, that would be great. So our advice or our suggestion is to try to delay it until things settle. But if that's just not possible, if you have educators that are really making decisions or want to make decisions based on what you're doing, or they really need to have that signed instrument, then we would say we defer to it. Then we would just strongly encourage, as much of a wait time as possible. But if they absolutely need to sign a contract, or you need to have something, then do it, based on the previous year or the previous budget. So, and then even caveat that and say, well, it could change when, conditionally change upon, again, certainty coming out of when we get to the special session. Okay, great question. Says, with the two budget scenarios, will they both need to be uploaded to UPEFs, or only the final one and things are settled? So I'm going to put Brett on the spot here. I thought about this a little bit last night, but I really, I'm not sure how much of a impact. I really think we could probably do both, but I know that might be a lot of work for you. But Brett, what are your thoughts on this? Or Brett or Patrick, what are your thoughts on this having to be, with the uploads on that? That's a great question. Brett, any thoughts? You there, Brett?
Hi, this is Brett, the State Board of Education. Can you please repeat that question? I think I understood it, but make sure that I get it all. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm going to try it, Brett. So we've recommended the two budget scenarios, like basically setting an initial budget based on the state fiscal year 20 budgets in support of, or at the direction of of HJR 301. Then later, when the legislature goes into special session, come out and they let us really know all the details of changes to state fiscal year 21 appropriations, they would go ahead and set a second budget. So do you want both, initially an initial budget provided to you along that line, and then an adjusted budget later on? Or would you rather wait until the,
Until it's settled?
Yeah.
I would probably accept the latter, that the original budget be based on after everything is said and done with the legislators, because we allow an original budget, and then at the end of the year, we allow a final budget, which is to amend any changes or updates that they may have had throughout the year.
Okay.
And so I would be acceptable, and I think the most accurate one would be the one after the session, the special session. And I don't think we need the one prior.
Okay. So I think that, you know, goes to my earlier statement that we're going to try to do this in as supportive in as a supportive manner as possible to the LEAs. This being this whole process of setting budgets. So what do you all think about that? Well, I can already see it. Yippee! I see a yippee. Thanks, Brett. So yeah, I support that too. You know, we'll let our board members know that that's our plan, is to just to wait and not, you know, hammer you guys. Um, you know, until everything's set, you know, well, not at all, but once we get, you know, things settled with the legislature, we'll just do it in one shot, okay? Through UPEPs. All right. Any other questions from anybody? Yep, everybody loves Brett, that's for sure. Any other questions related to budget deadline setting, the impacts of 2021? Again, I think we all recognize we're really just subject to you know, the special session and what the outcomes are from that. So, but again, we're going to support you. You know, if you got anybody, yeah, Kyle, yeah, basically hurry up and wait. That's a good, yep, that's a good way to put it. But if you guys get any blowback or any pressure or undue from, let me know, let me and my staff know, and we'll take care of it. Okay. Again, we're here to support you. We want to make sure that we resource you and support you the best we can. All, not just during this time, but always. So let's see if the special session bill passes. Oops. Let's see if the special session bill passes. What is the date that the budgets will be extended to? You know, I would venture to guess that it would be, you know, well into July, maybe even August. You know, again, it's just, you know, I think a lot of it just depends on how deep the impacts go, right? Or how little they go, you know, because if there's not a lot of changes, then, you know, using the two budget approach, you know, I think that, you know, we'd be able to adjust pretty quickly. You know, but we'll, as part of that overall process, when the bill comes out, when the draft bill comes out, staff are really good about going out to, you know, representatives from Uasbo. Of course, we can't go out to all of you, you know, and ask for input on the bills, but, you know, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll make sure when that draft bill comes out that we get it out to Leon, Todd, and Lark for their input. You know, my guys, Patrick and Jake can track that with Angie and her staff, and we'll make sure we get, you know, get your input so that, or, you know, with that one bill that's on hold, obviously, if those dates work, you know, depending on, you know, what, you know, where we're at in the session when they actually have it, and you know, the timelines that you would need, we can adjust the bill that's on hold to support you with timelines that work. Any talk of all of those rainy day yeah, okay, so great question, Tim. Yeah, so lots of talk about that. Now, you know, I'm sure you can imagine too that overall, you know, the overall impacts of this situation to the economy have, and this is why the legislature is saying they need more time, is they've just really got to see what the impacts are even to the general fund. I mean, we all know that the general fund had issues as well, but you know, how much of that would get applied? I mean, just in unemployment compensation alone, they're estimating that they would need close to $1 billion. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, or that's actually going to be, you know, where we end up. But you know, they're going to have to cover the, you know, the unemployment claims, and that's why, again, they're needing these weeks between this particular special session last week and sometime around May or June to really get this all settled. Any thoughts regarding trust lands funding? And yeah, okay, great question, Todd. So you can count on the trust lands funding impact as not as little to none. It's been set up very well. There was some legislation that passed back in 2016. And, you know, I checked with both Paula Plan, our director, and Treasurer Damchen several weeks ago regarding this, but I see no changes to the amount of I think we were a little bit over $80 million. I see no changes. And, you know, I know this is recorded, so, you know, you can play it back, but I see no changes to the trust lands funding distribution estimates or, you know, for the next fiscal year. That seems pretty solid. So can we assume? Yes. Yes, those will hold, Todd. Let's see. Okay, I think I got everybody's question so far with Todd Burks being the last one. Um, what other questions do you have in the chat room? I know we're kind of getting pressed for time here, so. Okay, Cami, can you put the agenda back up? So we'll do another azimuth check here, make sure we're going in the right direction or in accordance with the agenda. Okay, so CARES Act funding. You know, I don't have really any kind of a visual for you, but what I just want to reiterate is as item 4A. So we use a platform called Qualtrics. I'm sure a lot of you, all of you are familiar with that. Now, the key with the surveys, there could only be one point of contact on the survey. So it's decided to make your superintendents, well, and then for the charter schools, the directors, that point of contact. So if you'd all do me a favor and just make sure that your respective superintendents received the survey, it would have come to them by way of Qualtrics, but identified as me as coming from my email chain, or, you know, that I asked them to participate in the survey. Now, embedded in that particular survey is what we estimated, or initial estimates on how much you as a district would receive. Now, there's two sides to this. We've got Superintendent Stevens. We got him covered. So Robert, we took care of him. Sarah went back out to him today, so he should have it now. No problem. So, and you know, to Robert's point, yeah, that's why we need you to check. Make sure that your superintendents, yes, yeah, and great question. If your superintendent received it and forwarded it to you to fill out, that's absolutely okay. We want it to be a joint effort, but again, you know, just based on this, is not sure why, but there can only be one, you know, point of contact, or I think initial recipient, if you will, of the survey, and that's your superintendent. So, but if they forward it to you and you responded, that's great. But here's what we're anticipating. We're anticipating a few more iterations of the survey, especially as it relates to calculation. So we did an initial calculation of what we thought you would get, you know, based on the guidance that we got from Department of Education on how the allocations work. Now, I'm talking right now, I'm just focused strictly on the K through 12 side. I'm just on the K through 12 side. There's two sides to the CARES Act that affect public ed. The two sides being a K through 12 grant, or, you know, appropriation, if you will, and then what we'll call the governor. So I'm just going to stay on the K through 12 side, and I'll get to the governor side here, allocation in 4B in just a minute. So on the K through 12 side, we decided we'd use this survey. It's designed also to ask the questions that are pertinent to what direction or guidance we receive from Department of Education on how and where the money can be spent. For example, on mental health supportive services, or, you know, even just you know, increases in having to buy additional cleaning supplies, and, you know, all the deep cleaning that might have had to happen or did happen. All of these things we're trying to cover as part of it, as the overall response that we'll have to make at some point back to Department of Education on how Utah is spending this money, this being the K through 12 money. We're anticipating receiving approximately $67,800,000 plus dollars. And again, it's based on your Title 1A, just Title 1A, no other parts to Title 1, the Title 1A distributions. If you are a particular district that in the past is either waived or refused Title I, or hasn't received Title I, then you're not eligible for what basically amounts to a certain percentage of that. Now, the SEA, or us, USBE, can keep up to 10% of that. So, you know, internally, we'd look to for ways to help cover districts with that, but I can't make any guarantees. So if you are, I think we only had one district that fell into that category. So we'll look at ways of trying to help them, with our money at the USBE level. Anyway, when we sent out the first iteration of the survey, we had to follow back up because, of course, how it goes. We got additional guidance and that affected the first calculations. We got that guidance from Department of Ed, so we revised it. And even now, we're actually having to, come in probably behind that because private schools are also eligible to receive, just as an example of, why we might have to make adjustments to your allotments or, what we're estimating you'll receive. And, a few more iterations of the survey, if you will, is because, we get this, we send for clarity and then we get the clarity back and we have to make those adjustments. Now, we're not anticipating any kind of funding or seeing the funding at least for another month. They're saying it could be anywhere between, so it was last week they said it would be, as soon as we would see it as 4 weeks, and it could even be 4 to 8 weeks before we actually see the funding for the K through 12 portion or the governor's portion. Then, I've seen some of the input here. It says from Richard, why the change from FY20 to, let's see, why the change from FY20 enrollment to FY19 and calculate CARES funding? I'm not sure if it was a change, Richard. I mean, they're basing it, they are basing it on your FY19 Title 1A distribution. Patrick, is that right? We're basing it on their FY19 Title 1A distribution. Is that right?
Yes, it's federal fiscal year 19. That was
okay.
Confirmed with Becky and Tammy in the program. Yeah, that they received from the feds.
Yeah, Rebecca Donaldson and Tammy Long are our Title I program managers here. Richard, does that answer your question? Or if you want, you can unmute your mic and ask us if I might be missing what you're asking.
It seemed my superintendent said we got one estimate, and then based on the FY20 Title I allocation, and then we got another estimate based on the FY19 Title I allocation. Why did we go back to the 19 versus the 20? Is the question.
Yeah, Patrick, can you explain that? I don't think we changed it from 20, did we?
I didn't think we had 20 in there. We actually had some older year federal fiscal year estimates. What we initially did is we used from 18 and 19, which would have been, I guess, federal fiscal years 16, 17. But we got updated information from the education department that it is a requirement to use federal fiscal year 19 numbers. And so that's the update that we did.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Richard. Let's see, and then I saw another one, I think. Oh, one category I did not see. Okay, yeah, that's a good catch. So let me circle back to Sarah Young. She's or actually Patrick, will you get with Sarah and see about maybe another iteration having, how much they plan to spend on personal protective equipment, PPE.
Okay, so to potentially add that into the survey.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can check on that with her.
Okay. Now let me, okay, so before I move off the survey, the K through 12 piece of the funding, are there any questions related to the CARES Act funding specific through K through 12? That money will flow to us here at the USBE to distribute to you at a later date. Any questions or concerns about the K through 12 aspect of the CARES Act funding? More to follow, probably a couple more iterations of the surveys and final calculations. No, yeah, great question. That survey is not binding. You will be able to change it later. I mean, we're having to make changes based on, last minute or real time updates that we're getting from the Department of Ed. So absolutely not. We're just trying to get a good idea so that when we receive the actual applications that we have to turn in for them to release the funding, we have a lot of good information and data on where the money is going to go from you. So no, they are not binding. We will make changes to that. Or paid with. Yes. So you're welcome. So Stephanie, great question. My understanding is yes, that you know, well, actually, let me check on that. Hang on a second. Patrick, do you know about salaries? They didn't restrict it to, we can pay salaries, can't we? Or, you know, for sure.
My understanding is there's the flexibility to be able to do that. I can double check that with Becky and Tammy, but so far I believe that's the case.
Yeah, Stephanie, that's my belief too, but we'll double check on that so that, yeah, you'd be able to, you know, cover salaries for that or during this time. And here's the thing, I'm glad Stephanie brought this up. The money right now we're being told will be available for use for you through the end of September of 2021. However, it has to be used for cost for the 19 through 20 school year. So, you know, as long as, you know, Stephanie's question, and as an example, if it was used to pay salaries or, you know, labor costs, if you will, during the, you know, that are attributed for the 20 school year, that's great. Now, you know, maybe down the road that could change, but that's the guidance that we've got right now. Money would be available to you in the amount that we determine through September 30th of 2021. But it does need to be used or specific for costs incurred as related to the pandemic and for school year 19 through 20. Okay, so I'm going to move over into the governor's allocation because I know there's some other questions on policies. The governor's allocation is designed to, okay, let's see. Our sick leave and extended sick leave to be paid out of these funds for FY19 through 20. You know, Kyle, that's a great question. Let me have Patrick, will you just research that and then circle back to everyone? You know, again, we're pretty confident about salaries, but as far as sick leave and extended sick leave go, I think we probably need to research that a little bit more, Kyle, and get you the specifics on that. Okay, yep, no problem. Okay, for the governor's side of the allocation, this is again where we felt like the value of the survey is there, meaning that, you know, I probably don't have the words exactly right, but for the governor's allocation, now let me be clear on this too. The governor's allocation is for K through 16. So the amount of money that, you know, Governor Herbert gets or GOMB will get is basically designed to cover not only public ed, but higher ed as well. So one of the key pieces, though, on the K through 12 portion of the governor's allocation is to determine LEAs that were, and here's the quote signs, right, air quotes here, most impacted by the situation or by the coronavirus. Again, I don't have it word for word, but the two words that stand out are most impacted. Well, how do you determine that? Well, that's why the program folks and, you know, Sarah Young designed the survey to try to draw that information out, to really try to see, you know, if there's at some point we'll be able to communicate over to the governor's office which LEAs were, you know, these big two words, most impacted. So, you know, we plan on making sure that we're, you know, very transparent and clear on what the, you know, criteria is for determining most impacted, so that, you know, at some point too, we can turn around and let you know what portion, you know, and it's subject to GOMB or subject to the governor's office. Some states, the governors just decided to turn it over to the state education agencies, but for now, my understanding is that this portion of the CARES Act is going to remain in the governor's office. However, it's a joint team effort in determining, again, LEAs that were most impacted. And we're going to make sure that we're transparent with you on, you know, what criteria is being used. But initially, we're trying to use the survey to generate this out. You know, ways to determine or to be fair and equitable, if you will, in the application of determining LEAs that were most impacted. So that basically is just a quick summary of the CARES Act funding. You know, in my updates that I was sending out, I sent a lot of, like, you know, charts, updates, things like that. The CARES Act funding is also posted on our website. So, you know, if you'll check, you know, periodically on the coronavirus 19 and, you know, ask Patrick and staff, to make sure they get with our communication section here to keep those, keep that as real time as possible, because we do almost every day we get, more and more information on the CARES Act and the funding associated with it. So now I'll ask any questions on the governor's allocation portion that I might be able to answer before I move off on to the final agenda item number 5. Okay. Okay. Are we going to have to be programmatically account for CARES Act funding? That's a great question. Programmatically, we want to know, yeah, we'll have to report back on the expenditures. We're just going to really need to just be able to have you report back on, so for instance, if we give an LEA $100,000 out of the CARES Act K through 12 funding, we're just going to need to know, where you spent that money. I'm not going to go as far as to say that we'll have to do it programmatically, and we'll make sure though, because I get it, we're under the, I think I get what you're asking with the program accounting. We'll make sure that the expenditure support. If you take a look at the survey, you'll see the areas where the federal government has said it's the best use of money, or where they plan on seeing the money being used. For instance, to support mental health programs, to things. So, in essence, yeah, programmatically, but specific to the areas that they cover in the CARES Act. Okay, yeah, we could do that. We could we could provide you that program account, that coding. Yeah, that's my understanding is that was our intent all along, Patrick, right? Is we would provide the codes, the expenditure codes for it. We talked about
That's
that
correct.
before.
Yes, sir. Brett and I have been working on some of the codes for that we could propose to help track this.
Okay, and then I see Todd saying that Park City's already using a program code. Okay, so let me have Patrick and Jake get with Todd and a few of the others just to see where we can land, and Brett, just so we all land and then we're on the same page as far as what program code or expenditure code we can use. So we are working these up codes as well. We'd love to. Okay, yeah. That's goes to what I just said, Kyle. We do. We owe that to you. Let's try to all be on the same page as far as what codes to do. So more to follow from Patrick and Brett, or Patrick and his staff. Okay. So great question. Thanks, Bruce. Okay. Let's see. I just want to. Okay. We'll make sure. Okay. Yeah, Patrick. Good job. Let's see. Yeah, I just want to make sure, I caught, there was quite a few that came through all at once on the chat room. So, okay, I'll move on to item number 5, the soft closure policies discussion. So I know there's been a lot of questions about, can the USBE provide, policy templates, or, for example, I gave, as an example, I gave what I ran past Department of Ed related to paraeducators. So the paraeducators, let's see, Chad. Okay, did I hear you correctly that these CARES funds are for? Yeah, yes, they're tying it into school year 19 through 20s for. So yeah, state fiscal year 20 expenditures. Yeah. So even though the money might be available or is available right now, what they're telling us to you all the way through the end of September, no, not necessarily. It doesn't rule out summer school expenses if the summer school is a result of expansion of programs from school year 19 through 20, is my understanding. And we'll be able to solidify that in the next few days or into next week. But my understanding is that if you go into summer school and it's because or related to the fact that you needed to do that, to continue programs for your students, that you could use that, justify using the money to help offset those expenses in the summer school. You bet, Chad, no problem. Yeah, I'm 99.9% sure about that. So questions on number 5, soft closure policies discussion. There was a lot of I know early on, a lot of questions, concerns about paying, but not remediation in 20, let's see, Rod, I'm not sure what you mean by remediation in 2021. Can you unmute your mic and just make sure I'm tracking what you mean, but by not remediate? Oh, you mean remediation for the effects of the coronavirus, or yeah, Rod,
Yes, what if we have, try to remediate students to bring them back up to grade level, but it's happening in 2021? So probably we can't use those expenses because they're gonna happen in,
yeah, I don't, yeah, that's a good point. Let's research that. We can, we can get that clarified through Department of Ed. That's a great question. I'm sure my answer is correct to Chad about, hey, if you go into summer school, or into the summer months, I should say, as a result of, impacts on there. Yeah, I could see the same thing. Why couldn't you remediate in 2021? Let us clarify that though. Patrick, will you, get with Patty and Sarah, and let's try to get that clarified.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so it said, yeah, Paul, you're right. That was a question on the survey. And I think we're asking that question because we'd anticipate getting that question from you, which is what Rod did, from anyone. Yeah, and to get into the summer, but yeah, I think we need to use that word remediation for fiscal year 2020 or for fiscal year 21 as well. We'll get that all clarified. Does that help, Paul? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll get you the clarity you need. Using words like remediation, extensions into the summer, things like that. We'll get that all generated out with Department of Ed. So, okay. Any more questions on item number 4? Okay. So with item number 5, the soft closure policies discussion, we got a lot of questions early on about, payroll, especially for your classified employees. It's just an example. And we finally, after, I think it was probably a couple, maybe several weeks later, we were able to provide an example, which basically amounts to the federal government saying, hey, look, you're okay with continuing to pay employees with your federal funds. So the example we gave is you have a paraeducator. He worked a 3.5-hour schedule prior to the soft closures. And then you work, you keep said paraeducator on your payroll. He's paid for just as an example, paid for IDEA reimbursements. And on a particular day, you could only find 1 hour of work, or maybe that's not the right thing to say, but there was 1 hour of work he was able to perform that supported the program, supported the student in the program. You documented that. You were eligible to pay him for his normal 3.5 hours of work. And as long as he didn't go over and work on another program and you try to use that money, that IDEA money to pay for his time working on that other program. And if you had a written policy that's the same way you were treating your state workers or your state funded worker or employees. So, we said paraeducator, she works using, you pay her payroll, 3.5 hour schedule. Your policy is just to continue her in the same vein or the same manner that you do. That's what justifies you being able to continue to pay employees out of those federal funds. Basically, treating both state employees and those federally funded employees the same. And it was made clear to us because we said, well, we probably didn't, it's likely we didn't have these written policies in place. They said you could make those retroactive. Then the question started coming up, well, hey, can the USBE write the policies, and say that that's the way that the policy is, or this is the policy, on how to pay or, keep, we'd use the words, employees gainfully employed. Well, I asked and I got the guidance that we don't really want to get into the business of, writing policies for LEAs, that a lot of this is local decision making on your part. So if we were to say, we were to put out a policy from our level dictating to you that you had to do this way. Now, we're not saying that. All we were trying to clarify from the federal government's perspective is that they were willing to allow LEAs to continue to use federal funds as long as they could see, or that the local policy was the same for the use of the state funds. Now, a local entity, a local education agency may have decided, no, this is how we're going to treat our state employees differently. But that's the key piece to this, is that's your decision at the local level. Now you can, again, as long as you're treating, for lack of better terms, your state employees the same way, you can pay your federal employees. And so we gave those two examples. Now, Todd Burke put together a really good, and I'm sure you all others have as well. His was the only one I've seen so far, but it was a really good local policy. And it's fine to use our examples if that's the policy you want to adopt, but policies need to be adopted at the local level. And if Angie's still on, she can chime in on here, with me, because, we're trying to make sure that we stay in our lanes, and then also, support local control, but then try to provide you the information so that you can turn to your superintendents and your boards and provide them, with as much detail as possible for local decision making.
Scott?
Yeah, go ahead, Ange.
Just one thing I would mention, I heard my name. I think what we've been trying to do is provide answers to frequently asked questions. A lot of those are posted on our website under the coronavirus webpage of our website. And then, of course, Scott, as you know, has been communicating with you all periodically, daily, sometimes more than daily, sometimes a couple times a week. But I think that is our intent, is to try and answer questions and provide guidance as much as possible, but not establish those policies unless and until we want them, or the board wants them mandated, and then you're required to do something. And of course, that's when we provide those through board rule. But there are a lot of frequently asked questions and different guidance documents that have been provided on our website or through other groups as well. Like some of you might be aware of the grading and graduation guidance that was sent out last week. But I think that's been our MO, or kind of the expected operation, is just to provide support that way.
Yeah, and we got a question: is it necessary or required that every district adopt a soft closure policy? Well, it is required that you file a school closure plan, but we're not necessarily going through those and judging or saying, this is acceptable, this isn't. So to that question, is it required that every district, a soft closure policy? Everything, my experience is that everything that you should document anything and everything that you do, especially during times like these. So as long as you filed a school closure plan, then to Angie's point and to my earlier point, adopting your policies around that plan is what is the direction that you should head, right? We provide as much guidance and as much information as we can for what we hope is informed decision-making processes by you, your superintendents, and your board. But, yeah, I would say that, first and foremost, make sure that you have the school closure plan filed with us, and then align policies that support your school closure plan. That's my recommendation. So, yeah, and then we just provided the link on the, the education plan. Sorry. Yeah, I call it school closure plan. I shouldn't call it that. The correct term is continuity of education plans, right? Make sure you have a continuity of education plan filed with us. Follow the link that you see in the chat room, and then, align your policies based on the information and guidance we get and provide to you from Department of Education, and that are in the best interest of supporting your particular continuity of education plan. That's the best answer I can give to you for item number 5. Are there any questions or concerns with item number 5? Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that makes sense. Appreciate it. Yeah, any other questions or concerns with item number 5 about policies and the SEA's role or USB's role in all of this? Scott, can you review some planting? Okay. Yeah, so Todd, and so I'll defer to Patrick and and I think maybe I'll defer to Patrick and Jake, and then also I think Dale Frost is on here too. They've been really digging in a lot on the CARES Act funding. There is, it's not I don't think we're as restricted as we have been in the past with supplementing and supplanting. Remember, there's some key pieces or parts to the CARES Act funding that they want to see that money go towards, such as, mental health work and all that. But my understanding is initially we thought they were going to be very restrictive on, in the same sense, they are with Title I funding. Hey, you can't supplant, right? You have to supplement state funding. In this case, I think they're really trying to be as flexible as they can with this particular CARES Act funding, in order for you to have that flexibility, because they understand that you all might have experienced we all experienced the impacts of this particular pandemic, but at the local level, you guys might have experienced different, costs and associations with that. So, I'm not seeing that we're going to quite be as bound by, the supplement, this, don't, supplement, don't supplant in the past. But, Patrick did say, he's going to send out more guidance and specificity on that particular aspect of it. So great question. Let's see. Richard says, Scott, could you address my 11:49 a.m. question? Okay, let's see. 49. Brett. Okay. If an LEA has a private entity, yes. Okay, private school, I think you mean, Richard. Do they receive the CARES Act funding directly, or does the LEA have to reach funding? So, yeah, so we are going to have to go back on this. We just clarified that with Department of Ed too. Everything came together today. That yes, the private schools are eligible for this funding as well. How we're going to distribute that and what, I think we'll probably make an initial calculation up at our level, share that with you that, hey, as part of this is why, again, earlier I was talking about, there's going to be several iterations of the survey. There's going to be some changes and iterations to how much funding we finally land on for you, because, as we've mentioned, we keep getting, more clarity and more direction from Department of Ed. So first, my base answer is yes, those private entities that are within your boundary, those private schools are eligible for this funding. It's going to be based a lot on, your current levels of, how that works between you. My understanding is we'll go ahead and make initial calculations at our level and then update those to you. And then I think what we would do is we distribute it to you, and then you would go ahead and provide it to them. So that's where we're going initially with this, Richard, but more to follow as we get, closer to getting the money and getting this all finalized and hammered out. So does that help, Richard, with that particular question? Yeah, basically more to follow. We'll get the specific distribution, the amounts, and then the distribution technique to you. Les, Patrick, do you have anything along that line, related to private schools, or want to?
I'm gonna have to look that up, but we'll follow up and find out for sure, and we can send that out along with the supplant question and accounting issue.
Yeah. So Richard followed up with, yes, what if the private schools. You see, so my understanding as of this date time group is that if they've declined Title I in the past, then they wouldn't be eligible for it. Much like I alluded to earlier, which as of this date time group, my understanding or guidance from the federal government is that if an LEA district had refused Title I in the past or didn't get it, they're not eligible for initially for the amount coming out of the CARES Act for K through 12. So we'll develop that a little bit further, but I'm 99.9% sure that if they didn't get it in the past or didn't participate in the Title I program, they're not eligible to receive it. So we may have to come out to you for all of you, not just Richard, but and just double check and make sure that we have a clear understanding on what private schools have not received or refused Title I in the past, just to make sure to what right is in the end with all this money. So. Okay, so I know I apologize. I've gone over time here. We're like 7 minutes over time. So Leon, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you need anything from us? Any closing comments or anything we can do for you?
I just want to thank you. That's weird.
I can't. Hey, Leon, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm not sure about anybody else.
Oh, okay. I don't have anything.
Okay. So any other input from anyone else before we sign off? Okay. Hey, everyone, I appreciate you. I just got to let you know, just real quick, I've been called up by the Army, so I got to go on active duty for a while. I'm not really sure how long yet. So I'll be sending out a message on who you can contact. Deborah Jacobson will be covering for me. And then, of course, Patrick's on board now and Jake. So you guys are in good hands, as you know. So, but more to follow on that. I'm not sure how long I'll be gone, but we'll take care of you, okay? And just, always communicate with us. Let us know what we can do to support you, and we'll be glad to help you out anytime. So thank you all. Thank you for the notes and I appreciate your support and to our nation. So I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again for all you do for the students, and let us know what we can do for you.